So, about a year ago, we talked about the Last Supper and the communion of um, communion. The sacrament of communion. And I was thinking about the sacraments. The United Church of Christ only has one other sacrament, which is baptism, which we don't do so much anymore, but we do say the Lord's Prayer every week in community, and we've done it for a long time, and it's intended to bring us closer to God. So it looks like a sacrament to me. So I thought just for once, we might take a closer look of this prayer line by line. And I was also inspired to look at other faith traditions because of our April congregational meeting. A couple groups expressed an interest in interfaith worship. So the first one that we're going to look at is the 7 chakras, which were first recorded in the Vedas, which is the basis for both Hinduism and Buddhism. And if you don't know, the chakras are energy centers in the body. And the great insight of in the Middle Bronze Age was, well, we have a physical body, but we also have an energetic body, a subtle body, which is different but related. And here's a picture of different energy centers. This is the 7 chakra system, which is the most common. And so we're going to see how the Lord's Prayer lines up with this. And the second tradition is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is for people who think that alcohol is the source of all the world's problems, and it's also the solution. But finding out that their solution's not working that well, and they need to take some steps to recover from it. They would never say that they were a religion, but in the words of Yuval Harari, when someone makes something up and 1,000 people believe it for a month, well, that's fake news. But if millions and millions of people believe it for 1,000 years, well, that's a religion. And I think it is a practice, a spiritual practice, and I think it will be around for 1,000 years. And we're not here to learn all the ins and outs of the steps or the chakras, but just to see how they kind of line up with the Lord's Prayer, and if they can cast some light on what we think it means. If we can look at things in a new way or have it more amplified, then that could be very useful. And this is the first of a series about the Lord's Prayer. In another month, we'll talk about the soul. Let's get down to the real nitty-gritty. And then a month after that, we'll talk about relationships. So let's get started. And I'd like to start off with the big ooga booga, the word Father. This is a problem for a lot of people nowadays, and I get it. Some of us hope that we're in the throes of the last days of patriarchy, and we're kind of tired of having everything good and powerful and meaningful being associated with the male gender. I understand. And this has been true, when I was a little kid, and it's been true for really the entire history of Christendom. And I understand. I mean, my own relationship with my own father was not that great. And I left home when I was 16 and returned for short periods 3 times in the next 7 years. And I rather think that Jesus had a complicated relationship with his own father, who might not have been too thrilled about the appearance of Jesus at that particular time when he's trying to start a family and in that particular way. So I imagine that there was some tension there. And in fact, Jesus also left home, showed no signs of going back there. And when his family did come to visit him, he rejected them. And, his society was every bit as patriarchal as ours, but yet he chooses to start the prayer in this way. Now, the two things that we can be most certain about, upon which there is the most universal agreement about Jesus, is one, he was crucified, and two, he had this habit of referring to God as Abba, which is in his native Aramaic language. And Abba is father, but really in the sense of daddy. The translation, it's like mama and papa. It's kind of the word that very infants, toddlers, very young children would use to address a parent. And it is a whole different feeling. It's a word that comes from a place of vulnerability and trust. It's a place of appreciation for those who feed us and who protect us. So however patriarchal things are, what he's suggesting is when you begin this prayer, you want to begin with a certain emotional stance, a stance that includes these words of humility and trust and hopefulness. And if you want to use another word, fine. Jesus would be the last person to say God should be gendered. That's just counter to the whole way that he lived and taught. And he would be the last person to say, you have to say exactly these words. But what is important is the feeling. Whatever word you want to use, he's suggesting that you start from this kind of attitude because you're going to be going on a trip. Now, the first step is, on the surface, it looks like the opposite. The Lord's Prayer, we're kind of going, we turn our awareness to God, let's go to heaven. People who have bottomed out and whose lives are kind of a mess are actually kind of living in hell. But I think that functionally, it's really about the same thing. There's two ways to get there. One is to face it directly, face heaven directly and try to go. And the other is to just continually keep backing away from hell. It doesn't matter whether you're pulling the cart or pushing the cart. What matters is that you're moving and you're going in the right direction. Looking at the Vedas, it would begin with the root chakra. And by the way, the Vedas, that thing that kind of bounced in there is the symbol of the root chakra. And I'm just picking out certain aspects of each chakra. They all are associated with different colors, with different symbols, with different aromas and flavors and organs of the body and all sorts of things. It's really a huge cosmology. But we're beginning with the insight that in addition to our physical body, we have a fountain of energy within us, which they call the Kundalini. And this is where our energy starts, our potential, our capacity for growth and change. And, but like a baby or an infant, it's raw, it's chaotic, it's undisciplined, it's unmanageable in a way. And that the intention is that this energy be purified by going through a series of steps. You kind of have to start at the bottom, no mud, no lotus. Now, the next phrase we come to is hallowed be thy name. That's we're using the King James Version. Matthew and Luke are close, but not exactly the same. And we are closest to what we say is closest to the Matthew version. A more natural translation of the word would be revered. But the point is that this is a sign, a flag on the journey saying we are now entering sacred space, a place where all things are possible, where amazing things can happen. And the second step is that, exactly that, realizing the way we've been doing things isn't working very well as we would like, and that there is a power greater than us that could restore us to sanity. Notice that in neither case do they actually provide us with the word or the name that it's supposed to be. They just say, if you're trying to get to know it, it's got to have a name. And just the main thing is to know that it's greater than us. The second chakra is where the self is established, our personality. And it's just like a child developing. At a certain point, they begin to know that they're different from their parents. They revere their parents because our parents are the first gods and goddesses in our life. But at some point we realize, but I'm my own person. Especially you'll hear the word mine. And we're not going to go through the Four Noble Truths, but each of these Four Noble Truths has 4 stages of learning the truth. And the first stage is in the gut, and where the sacral lotus is. You have an intuitive gut level sense of the truth. Now, the kingdom is not, of course, a place in the sky. A kingdom is an authority structure. It's a way of making decisions. So the third step is to say, in effect, you know what? I can't. A higher power can. I think I'll let it happen. So I think I will choose to enter into a different authority structure than my own ego and turn my life over to a better way of making decisions. And the navel chakra is our personal treasure center. That is, we have some truth within us. We learn things as we go along. But the first step in purifying this energy is to distinguish between the self that we're identified with and a greater truth. Our self is not up to that truth, but we do have the capacity of learning it. Now, we've taken 3 steps, and up to this point, the prayer that Jesus is suggesting that we pray is almost nothing new in it. It's a summary and exactly the same as the mourner's Kaddish. That and the Shema are the 2 most well-known prayers in all of Judaism. And like a really good teacher or a really good counselor, Jesus knows that he needs to start from where the people are at, with something familiar. So they would not be surprised at all of the things they've heard so far, except for one thing. The one change he makes is exactly the word Abba. Why is that? The mourner's Kaddish, which is said in all the public rituals, the intent of it is to say, in the midst of our grief, in our despair, in our disorientation at great loss, we still are going to be obedient to Yahweh. We are pledging our allegiance to Yahweh's authority. And this Yahweh apparently likes obedience. He likes people to follow the rules. and gets quite testy when people don't, and can mete out some severe punishment. Jesus starts from a different place. Instead of the intent of the prayer being, and you'll see this as we go along, pledging our allegiance to God, we recognize the wisdom and authority of God, but really we are opening our hearts to remind ourselves that God has allegiance to us. Instead of reaffirming our allegiance to God, we are reaffirming our knowing and trusting that God has allegiance to us, that God will be there for us. So now we begin with the new part of the prayer, what Jesus adds, and that is a request, a plea to give us our daily bread. And Jesus is all about bread. That's a big word for him. In fact, he was born in Bethlehem. Bet, house of, lachem, bread. He was born in the house of bread. And at the end of his life, he invites people to see that his memories is bread for us. The bread, the first thing, one of the first things he says in Matthew is to rebut Satan by saying, man does not live by bread alone, that is physical bread for the physical body, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That is spiritual bread for our energetic body, our subtle body. Step 4 is the hardest one, or the most intimidating one for a lot of people. And that is to look at ourselves and take an inventory. Now, the word's carefully chosen here. It's just an inventory, okay? It's just being realistic. You don't have to feel shame. You don't have to feel guilt, and neither should you be involved in puffing yourself up, writing a history of yourself for a press release. You're just taking an inventory, a moral inventory. And the 4th chakra is the heart chakra, which is really quite important. It's the midpoint of the whole thing. The 3 chakras below have to do with the self in the sense of the personality. The 3 chakras above have to do with developing spirituality and a sense of ourself as being part of the great self with a capital S. And this energy all passes through the heart. It's kind of the grand central station of the chakras. And now we begin with another plea, another request to forgive us our debts. And of course, wouldn't it be great if all of our debts could be forgiven? Well, it's not about those kinds of debts. It's about moral debts. Debts that we have incurred because we did something to someone or to ourselves, which results in a separation from God, either forgetting God or doubting God or denying God. That's a moral debt. And we need to be forgiven for that. The steps provide a lot of detail of several steps. There's a lot that needs to be done for this because it's a hard thing to do. And because in the wreckage, what they call the wreckage of their lives, they have a lot of debt that needs to be worked through. And the chakras agree. The second stage is not just having a gut sense of what needs to be done, of the truth, but starting to get specific about it, knowing specifically what needs to be done. Now, we're going to be coming back to this next month and the following month, so I'm not going to go into as much detail, and I'll just give you a chance to look at this, but I'm hoping that you begin to see a sort of harmony between these three systems. They're kind of aligned, and there's even a logic from step to step. The Lord's Prayer evokes a series of openings in our heart. First, we turn our attention to the Spirit, which is why we're praying in the first place, right? Then within the safety of that, within the protection of that, then we might have the courage to actually look at ourselves. And as we understand and are more realistic about ourselves, standing on that ground, we can turn our attention toward others, and especially to the hard parts of what we've done to them. And then finally, after gone through these openings, we can return and be reunited with our higher power or God or the cosmos. Now, we say this every Sunday, and there's a tendency, it's good to say it all together because that's what brings us together. But, it's kind of how you say it makes a big difference. What if we said the prayer, at this point we say, and lead us, and I hear this, and lead us not into temptation. But what if we just said, and lead us not into temptation? It gives a sort of different sense of priorities or different spirit to it. And the temptation of any ritual that's repeated is to fall into routine. And I will say it again at the end of this service. And the reason we say it in the same way in this little sing-song pattern is it brings us together. We're all together and saying it, and that has a value. But when you say it to the prayer by yourself, try looking at how you feel, play around with it a little bit, and see if something new arises. Here's a lot of words, but we will learn more about how to avoid problematic situations, how to avoid them, or once we get into them, get out of them fast. We'll come back to that, so I'm skipping it for now. Now, here's the end of the prayer. And personally, honestly, I don't think that Jesus actually said this. It just doesn't sound like him to me. He doesn't talk this way. Matthew does talk this way. Matthew loves the Hollywood ending. He loves the big finish. But I do feel that Jesus would not disagree with it. He would agree, you know what, the sky's the limit here. Anyone and everyone is capable of developing all levels of consciousness. And the final step, step 12, is also directed toward having a spiritual awakening. And it is the 12th step, and it's the last step, but you're not done because you've seen some value in taking these steps. They are steps that go someplace. You've gone from a lower self or lower level of consciousness to a higher one. Well, go through them again, and you'll get even higher. So it shares the same goal, as does the chakras. The crown chakras, right at the very top of your head, and it's where all of the energy of the cosmos pours into us. And it's also the place where all of the energy, all of the purification that we might have achieved goes out to the cosmos. It's the connection between us and the world. So I would just say, it's just an introduction, but I'm offering some takeaways that you might think about for the Lord's Prayer. It's to be not just said, it's to be prayed. It's to be felt tangibly and embodied when we say it. Put your whole self into it, and not just said, but walk the talk, practice it in daily life. I've said this prayer many times in preparation for this, and I found great value in it. These pleas that there's, I think, 5 of them in the Lord's Prayer. They're pleas, but they're also plants. This is a program for spiritual growth. And if you see some harmony in this, with the other traditions, know that when we are saying the Lord's Prayer, very Christian prayer, but we are in concert with, in companionship with people who are recovering from addictions, and people who are Buddhist and Hindu brothers and sisters and people of goodwill all over the world. So it's not just about us as an individual, it's really a prayer in the service of and on behalf of all of humanity. So if you would like to try making it a practice, here's a good sense of attitude of starting the prayer. Look at your own suffering. What problem are you looking at? Is your life unmanageable in some way? Is your inner energy raw, chaotic, bouncing around in some need of refinement? You don't have to keep on analyzing the problems. Just hold it in your heart and just say the prayer. Let the prayer do the work. It will work. And when you do it, remain open to whatever arises in your awareness as a result of your intention to experience the truth, your truth, the truth, directly. And if you do that, share what you find. Share it with others and listen to what they have to share with you. That is the good news for today. Lord's Prayer 101.